Good. Greetings. Sorry, almost forgot I was here. Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 7. School Spirit, Part 1. Haunted Halls of Learning. The Monk's Manifestation. Enigmatic Entity. And Permanent Roommate. In this new chapter, School Spirit, if a ghost is psychic energy left behind after the corporal body has left the earthly plane, then it's not much of a surprise to learn that school buildings are often haunted. Teachers put an enormous amount of energy into their instruction, and most students, despite frequent protestations to the contrary, often invest an equal amount of positive emotion into their school experiences. Interestingly, Washington seems to have an inordinate number of haunted schools. In our first short story here, we have Haunted Halls of Learning. Many years ago, when classes for the new term at the Academy of Evergreen Boulevard in Vancouver began, the teacher welcomed what she thought was a room full of new faces. After a period of instruction from the teacher and interaction among the children, the school bell rang. One of the boys who had been participating in the morning's activities immediately stood up from his desk and left the room. His departure was primarily noteworthy for the fact that he exited by walking through a solid wall. The little wraith has never been seen again. The Haunted Academy is no longer a school, but on some occasions it is still full of students, or the ghosts of former students. Night workers at the facility, which now houses commercial enterprises, have reported hearing the sounds of children's voices coming from the rooms that the workers know to be empty. Inevitably, when the workers unlock the room, the sounds stop as suddenly and mysteriously as they began. Worse, no amount of searching produces a rational flesh and blood explanation for the sounds they have all clearly heard. Phantom footsteps are heard pacing on the top floor, an area that is now locked and consigned to storage. Some long-dead soul is apparently pacing back and forth into eternity. And our next short story is The Monk's Manifestation. Although many would disagree, St. Martin's College, a private school in Lacey, is widely believed to be haunted by the ghost of a monk. The spirit was reportedly seen by a group of people standing in a fourth-floor hallway on the evening of in the early 1990s. All those assembled watched in amazement as the monk's image strode toward them. Much to their surprise, he stopped and asked where he could find his students. Without waiting for a reply, the monk walked on, turned a corner, and vanished. Until that moment, the presence had not been so lifelike that everyone assumed that he was a living human being. The specter is thought to be the ghost of a young monk who plummeted to his death in the autumn of 1962. He may not be the only long-dead presence lingering at the school, however. A security guard who fell asleep one evening was startled awake by the sound of snoring, and it was not his own. Alarmingly, the guard could see that he was utterly alone in the room. As befits a school setting, the ghost or ghosts at St. Martin's like to play pranks, usually by manipulating light switches from an on position to an off position, or vice versa. For the most part, though, the living and deceased at St. Martin's coexist very peacefully. And our third story is entitled Enigmatic Entity. Just after World War II, the Burnley School of Professional Arts began conducting classes in a facility at the corner of Broadway and Pine in Seattle's Capitol Hill district. The building had served many purposes since its construction in 1907. A portion had even been used as a high school gymnasium, and it was this function that apparently caused the building to become haunted. Legend has it that while a physical education class was being held in the gym, a fight broke out between students who had been playing basketball. Before the melee could be stopped, a student was dead. His spirit is generally accepted as the one haunting the building. Budding artists and their instructors who used the facility came to call the presence Burnley. They became quite comfortable with the sounds of the resident phantom making his way up and down the hallways and creaking old stairs, except when they were alone in the building at night. Because they were visual artists, the students would have many lights as possible turned on while they painted or sketched after nightfall. Despite the brightness of their surroundings, they could often hear a presence which they could not see. For this reason, many students passed up a second opportunity to work independently at the school in the evening. Some sounds, such as a piteous moaning that a group of young artists heard but could not track down, were disturbing even when the company of others during the broad daylight. The rustling noise made by a person flipping through a magazine did not frighten anyone, until the sound was investigated and found to have been coming from an empty room. For a time during the late 50s, an artist named Henry Bennett and his living quarters in the haunted building, when he was interviewed about this time with a wraith as a roommate, Bennett spoke very matter-of-factly. He acknowledged that when he went to investigate strange sounds, such as someone walking or working in a particular room, he frequently found the area deserted. He also added that he had never felt afraid of the ghost. In 1965, Susie Smith, no relation to me, who was at the time collecting and writing true ghost stories, toured the haunted school with a group of highly regarded psychics. Their tour must have been an exciting one. The mediums were unanimous in their opinion that there had been a death in the vicinity of the building in the days when it had been used for sports. They also agreed that the ghost was from this earlier era. This information went a long way toward explaining the strange noises. And such is the sound of the desks being dragged away, which were frequently reported in the area that had once been the gym. When people heard this racket, they inevitably investigated and always found the room and its contents as they should be, empty, with all the desks in place. Later in the evening, Smith's group held a seance, using a stool as the tool of communication. The corporal beings present asked if there were any spirits in the room who wished to speak. In such situations, a spokesman for the group typically asked the ghostly entities to tap the floor with the stool. The code suggested is most often one tap of the stool legs for a positive answer, 2 taps for a negative response. In this case, however, the seemingly mundane little piece of furniture did not respond in the expected manner, but jumped into frenzied action, banging and crashing around the room in a manner far too energetic to impart any discernible information. As the Fuhrer was dying, one of the psychics unexpectedly slipped into a trance. Judging from his monologue, the spirit of the murdered basketball player had entered his body. The poor soul was extremely distressed. He was not only angry that he was dead, but also upset that time had continued to march forward since his death. After that supernatural meeting, the spirits at the art school were apparently either much calmer or gone for good. Oddly, no story about a death in the building, much less the violent death of a young person, could be found in any of the records pertaining to the building. In the final analysis, the haunting that took place at the Burnley School of Art was truly an enigma. And for our final story in this episode, permanent roommate. Permanent roommate. Unfortunately, even living off campus has no guarantee of ghost-free accommodations at Washington schools. In the pretty community of Pullman, on the eastern edge of the state, an apartment that is usually occupied by students is also home to a ghost. Its large suite, most often shared by 2 or 3 people, when all the roommates are home, there can be a fair number of footsteps sounding up and down the hall in the apartment. But occasionally, occupants hear more sets of footprints than there are tenants. One year, the situation continued throughout the academic term. The next year, the same 3 students moved back in. The ghost must have wanted to let them know that he was still in residence too. As the 3 boarders sat in the living room on a completely still day, the front door of the apartment suddenly slammed shut with tremendous force. Even though they often left the door open, the incident never recurred. The sounds of the phantom footsteps, however, continued to be heard just as they had the year before. The 3rd year, one of the roommates found accommodations elsewhere, so a new person came to live in the haunted apartment. As it turned out, she and the suite were well matched. She had lived in a haunted house before and was well accustomed to ghostly goings-on. Perhaps this encouraged the spirit because he began to ensure that the students were always aware of his presence. He would turn stereos on in the middle of the night and play with the cutlery in the kitchen drawers. This last incident left the tenants badly shaken. Although they had found all of the kitchen drawers closed, they found the cutlery inside them to be in complete disarray, which was certainly not the way they had left it. At this point, the roommate who was most familiar with ghosts tried to coax the presence to leave. Perhaps she was successful, as there had been no further reports of the haunting. It's equally possible, though, that the phantom is simply waiting for new friends to join him in Palouse County's great beyond. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll see the next part of Chapter 7 in the next episode. Until then, take care and have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye for now.